Please be seated. The court is now in session. For today's proceeding, the Chamber will continue to hear the statements by civil parties as scheduled and as parties were informed on Monday this week. Mr. Dojpari, could you report the attendance of the parties and individuals to today's proceeding? Dojpari, Mr. President, for today's proceeding, all parties to discuss are present. As for Mr. Nunchi, he is present in the holding cell downstairs based on the decision of the trial chamber concerning his health. The civil parties who are to testify today are four. The first one is TCCP 156, TCCP 7, TCCP 13. This civil party will testify just through audio-visual link from France. And the fourth TCCP today is TCCP 198. The three civil parties are present and awaiting the call from the chamber. President, thank you. Court officer, could you invite the civil party TCCP 156 into the courtroom? President, good morning, Madam Civil Party. May we know your name? Civil Party. My name is Thujpan Daraso. Thank you, Madam Pandara. Madam Civil Party, please observe a small pause before you speak. You need to wait until you see the red light on the tip of the microphone or the console so that your voice will go through the system, in particular through the interpretation system, as your voice will be interpreted simultaneously into English and French. And your microphone will be operated by the AV unit. How old are you? Civil Party, Mr. President, I'd like to make a request to Mr. President that I'd like to make my statement in French, as all my family members are living in France and they do not speak Khmer, and they are waiting to hear my statement in the French language. President, please do so. You can use any of the 3 languages used in this courtroom. You can speak in French, of course. And the interpretation books, please prepare yourself, as the Civil Party will now testify in French. Question, can you tell us your age?
I was born on 22 August 1946. I'm 67 years old and I am a French citizen. And I'm married and I have 3 children. And one of them died during the genocide.
Question, where were you born and where is your current residence?
I was born in Phnom Penh in the 3rd quarter, and I was living in Tok La'o with my parents, and currently I live in Paris.
Thank you, Madam Panara. As a civil party before this court, you are given an opportunity to make your statement of sufferings and harms occurred upon you, namely the physical, material, and psychological impact, which are the direct result of the crimes which led you to become a civil party, and which have been accused against the 2 accused here, that is Noji and Khieu Sampon, and that they occurred during the Democratic Cambodia regime from the 17th April 1975 to the 6th of January 1979. And that is the opportunity that we give you as a civil party. In this case, you may proceed.
Yes, I remember 17 April 1975, when the Khmer Rouge entered the city. We were all very, very happy to see a change in regime, because we were saying to ourselves that now there was peace. I saw my mother with her white flag, smiling, and she said, that's it, there's peace now. We're no longer going to suffer from war. And we're going to share our goods with the community. And then we were all very enthusiastic. Everyone was joyful. Everyone was so joyful because the war seemed to be over. And during the afternoon, at the beginning of the afternoon, the Khmer Rouge soldiers arrived and they asked us to leave. We didn't understand why at the beginning. We didn't understand what was going on, why we had to leave. We had to rebuild the country, sharing our goods. We were willing to do all that was necessary for that. And this Khmer Rouge soldier said to us, we have to leave. You will only leave for 3 days because the government is trying to clean up the city, he said. So you have to leave so we can clean up the city and to avoid the bombing. And at the beginning, we were hesitant. And then there were neighbors who told us that we have to get ready. There were people out in the street. And I was with my parents. We were living in the same building, although we had each an apartment. And my parents were also surprised. We were not ready to go. And then, after about an hour, other soldiers came, and then we became afraid because the soldiers were very aggressive. And they asked us right away to prepare our bags to leave for 3 days. So my father therefore ordered us to collect our bags and to prepare ourselves to go for a few days. And I had 2 young children with me and 2 nephews who were already in France, but who had come back, and there were 4 children. And I tried to gather a bit of clothing, some water, and medicine. And then I tied up the 4 children because there were too many people on the way. And I started becoming afraid because people were everywhere. We had 2 cars. And we couldn't proceed. We even had to push the car at one point because there were so many people coming from everywhere. And there was my little sister with a little bicycle next to me. And she had arrived in the evening. Correct. In the evening, we arrived at the road to Sihanoukville. And then suddenly, I heard a voice saying, give me your watch. A very aggressive voice. And since I was afraid of losing my children whom I had tied together, then I heard a gunshot, and then I saw a man who had just been killed. And that is when I understood that things were very, very serious. We were all very, very afraid. And then our cars were taken away from us. We also had a dog, a German Shepherd. So they confiscated our cars, and my little sister gave her bicycle right away to the Khmer Rouge. But the dog didn't want to leave the car. And since we were so afraid, we left all our clothes behind in the car. We only had water and rice to go to kilometer 13, because at kilometer 13 we had a little plot and we had a little garden there. And we arrived at kilometer 13, and we spent one night there. The next day, we kept on going with the soldiers forcing us to move ahead with the masses of people. And then I saw the worst thing of my life. I saw women give birth in the street. And I saw sick people in their beds with their drip on the road under the burning sun. And I saw people who couldn't walk. And children were forced to leave their parents behind. And you know that we worship our parents. Parents are very sacred to us. And when we saw parents separate from their children, it was something that was extremely, extremely hard for Cambodian children. So the soldiers forced us to move on. And we spent 2 to 3 nights in a village called Ongomias. And before we entered the village, my grandmother's little nephews came to collect us. They were in the village, and they whispered to us. There were 3 of them, and they asked us to destroy all of our administrative documents, our ID cards, so that we would have nothing with us. And they said that you have to change your name. You're no longer called Darasan. Take a nickname. And it is as of that moment that I have been called Tel, which is still the nickname I have. So we remained in this village for a little while. In the morning we had to go out into the field to work. Some of the men would go quite a ways away and come back every 10 days, and the women would work in the fields close by. And every day there were spies watching. And we stayed there for a few days. But it seemed so far to me. And the nephews of my grandmother gave us food, gave us rice and cassava. But there were no protein. There was no fish, for example, maybe a little bit of sugar. Which helped us a bit. And then we had to evacuate this village. They asked us to board trucks to Pursat province, first to Kampong Shnang and then to Pursat, and then we took the train. And this was a cattle train. We were packed together in these boxcars. And then we arrived in Phnom Chung Tiet. And then it's at Phnom Chung Ting that famine really began. The true famine. So we had to build a shack. They said, okay, sort it out. We didn't even have knives or forks, and we were obliged to barter to have knives so we could cut branches to make these shacks, improvised shacks, we could say. And we started working very early in the morning, and we would return very, very late at night. And with very, very little food, only a ladle full of rice. And the children were very, very hungry. It was the rain season. We were soaked. And the children ended up in the mud without anything to eat. And they said, why are you coming? I want to go home where we had everything to eat. Why are we in the jungle? I'm hungry. How can you answer that question? Young children, 4 children. And then the men would go plow the earth. And for the first time, I saw my father plowing the ox cart, pulling the ox cart himself. I would see my father age by 10 years in a few days. And this is something unbearable to see. I would see his hair become gray. I would see him pull the plow in the mud. So then I wanted to die. I could not stand this sight. And I was given work as well. One day we were denounced. So the Khmer Rouge came then to collect us very early in the morning. My husband was already ill, and he was ill as of the first days. His legs were swollen. So he stayed in the shack, and they brought us away, 6 families together. My grandparents had 9 children, and I was together with the 6 families in the village of from the village of Ongom Mies. We left the 6 families together to this place near Battambang. And the Khmer Rouge brought us to an unknown place. I thought we would be killed in the rice field. We were standing on line, and the people started working very, very early in the morning. It must have been 5 o'clock or 4:30 in the morning. And the Khmer Rouge were just watching us, and I was saying to myself, that's it, they're going to shoot us here. But thank God, they brought us to Bong Kon Tui. And then at Bong Kon Tui, they questioned us for an entire morning. And the group leader, called Tapon, who was with soldiers and women soldiers as well, and they asked us for our biography, exactly like what happened at the beginning. People were asking us about our personal history, and we said, well, I'm a rice farmer, and we no longer had our documents, as I said, and we had all been shopkeepers, and it was very harsh questioning. They questioned us from early in the morning until late in the afternoon. The same questions over and over again. They said, you're the wife of General Ting Sari. We were told that your husband is a doctor, but we always told the same story, that we are just simple people, ordinary people. Traders, shopkeepers. And at one point, the wife of the general almost broke down. I felt that she wanted to tell the truth. But finally, I shook her up, and she gathered her spirits, and she remained calm, and they released us. It was about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And then they gave us some food. That was fantastic. Hard rice, real rice. That was fantastic, with dried fish. We really felt that was something that was extraordinary. And I was so hungry. My parents were jumping on the rice. I even heard rumors that we would first be given food and then we would be killed. And I was always afraid. I ate half of it. I gave half of my ration away. I kneeled down to offer my parents what I thought would be the last meal. But thank God they released us. And they, however, separated us. At about a 2-kilometer distance from each other, from each family. And the spies started watching us. They sent my parents, who were old, to go work with the teenagers without eating. And they couldn't barter for food. And my parents, therefore, in 1976, died one after the other. My entire family, in fact, in 1976.
The President. Council, you may proceed.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. My name is Mike Giro. I'm from the FIDH team, and I'm assisting Mrs. Finas in this procedure. At the outset, I would just like to draw your attention to the documents that will enable the court and the parties to find where they are in this testimony. She became a civil party in January 2008, and you have a victim information form under D22/189. I'll give you the ERNs for that. In French, it's 0027 93 74 to 77. ERN in English is 00 84 78 52 257. And in Khmer, it's 0040 42 56 267. Mrs. Fenies gave further testimony on the 9th of April 2009, and the English ERN of that is 008521 79 to 81, and in French 0058 45 51 to 53. Mrs. Phineas has never been heard by the prosecutor's office nor by the co-investigating judges, and she was met by the OCIJ office under the heading of Forced Transfer Stage 1. Now, Madam Phineas, to begin with, good morning. I have just mentioned the documents whereby you became a civil party. Now, have you been able to reread those documents since then? And if you have, are they accurate? Or are there some points you might like to give us further details on?
The President, please hold on. Observe the light on the microphone when you speak.
Oui, maître.
Yes, Counsel. I read the document and I did see that there was a small typing mistake about the rockets that fell on my first house in 1972. They weren't Khmer Rouge rockets, in fact, they were Viet Cong rockets. In the document it says Khmer Rouge shells, and I'd like to have that rectified. Counsel, thank you very much. In the remaining time we have, Mrs. Vignes, I'm going to be asking you some questions about the impact that everything you described may have had during your life, during the facts themselves and subsequently. In those opening remarks just now, you talked a great deal about hunger. Was the deprivation of food that you suffered something that had a serious impact on you afterwards? And if so, could you please tell us about that? Yes. After that, after leaving Cambodia in 1979, I became a compulsive eater, and I certainly put on a lot of weight. I always long for food. I can do without a great deal of things, comfort, money, or whatever, even a roof over my head, but I need to have food. Counsel, thank you. In what you said this morning, you told us about your father and the elders and the importance of this in your culture. What are your feelings today about your parents? Does this still strike a particular chord with you today? And if so, tell us about it, please. In Cambodia, children venerate their parents. They're almost sacred. You don't touch them. And to see my parents dying well before they were old, in their 50s, without me being able to give back to them what they gave to me, is something that will never be erased from my life. The conditions in which they died were not worthy of animals. It's better for animals, they get buried, but my parents died in a way that there are no words to describe. Thrown into the ditch, naked. I don't even know the place where he was discarded, and I retain a terrible feeling of guilt about this. Not having been able to save my parents. If I was perhaps a little braver, I might have been able to feed them, bring them some rice, something. You never erase memories like that. And that's why I'm here to ask this court for justice. To give the deceased back their souls so they may leave in peace. Because right now, I know their souls are lost between the living and the dead. And if there is justice, That would be an honor to them. That's why I want to come to call for justice. And not just for them, for the 2 million other Cambodians who disappeared thanks to that Khmer Rouge regime. Council, thank you. Mrs. Fenyes, you've told us about your parents, and in your opening remarks, you also talked about one of your sons who died during that period. Mr. President, may I ask the Court's permission to put on the screens 4 photographs which will help me to ask some questions to Mrs. Fenyes about the members of her family who are in the photographs and about how she was able to keep the photographs. The photos were sent round to the parties yesterday, and now, sir, I'm asking you for your permission to project them on the screens so as to be able to use them in questioning Mrs. Fenyes.
The President, thank you. You may proceed, and I wish to remind the civil party that you have until 10 o'clock this morning to make your statement.
Merci. Madame Fenyes,
Thank you. Madam, you have the picture on your screen. I don't know if everybody else does. And I'd like you to tell the court and the parties who the people in the photos are. He had meningitis. He took a biscuit from the mouth of a dog that Khmer Rouge had thrown away, and then in the evening he had a high temperature, and his father, who was a doctor, knew that his son had meningitis. We tried to obtain some penicillin in exchange for some jewels, but nobody had any, and it was a very hard day when he died. He had been wearing a T-shirt, a yellow T-shirt, and it had a slogan on the T-shirt: "If I smile to you, do you smile to me?" And when he died and I saw written upon his chest, "Will you smile back to me?" while he was on his deathbed, I think any mother would understand the appalling emotion I went through.
Madame Fenyes, on va...
Mrs. Fenyes, we're going to show more of the photographs, and you can tell us if you want to add something or if you would rather not. I do want you to tell the court and the parties about how you managed to keep these photographs. We're looking at the picture of your son, but there is also a picture of your mother and your husband, who died in 1976. Now, can you tell the court, please, how you were able to keep these photos and whether they are the only items that you have managed to keep from those days or not? Yes. I was very careful to hang on to these photographs. They were very dear to me, and I wrapped them up in plastic covering, and sometimes I hid them underground. And when I went to work, I took them with me always, and here you see my husband, who's a doctor. Counsel. Mrs. Fenyes, are these photographs the only memory, tokens that you were able to keep from the pre-75 days? Yes. They are the only things. Council, I have two more questions, Mrs. Fines. I know you have some questions to put to Mr. Q-Sampon in particular, and those questions have to be asked in the time we have available to us. So let me ask you now two questions about exile. From your testimony, we have understood that you became a refugee in France in 1979, and it's very important when you're talking about the impact of crimes to understand what exile means. And I'd like to ask you to describe to the court and to the parties the feelings you went through when you reached France in 1979 with your son, who survived, and with your sister. I had 3 lives, in a way. I had a fine life with my parents before the genocide. During the genocide, it was sheer hell. Then, after in France, it was a struggle to survive as well. I went through periods of terrible solitude because you had to fight for everything. You had to go through your driving test again. You had to do evening classes to obtain the same degrees and diplomas as before. You had to do menial jobs. It was a complete uprooting. I know I had some French culture, but France is an enormous place, and I found myself in a world where the transport, the seasons, winter was very difficult. There were strikes. I had to feed a child and a sister, and it was very hard for me. And I broke down. I went to the psychiatric institution for 3 months at one point. Psychologically, it was extremely taxing. Council. Thank you, Ms. Fines. Perhaps one more question before you ask the President if you can put some questions to the accused. This morning you said you would like to speak in French because your new husband and your son and the members of your family in France do not speak Khmer. Tell me, do you talk about that period now with your children? Yes, from time to time. To my youngest son, but to the elder one I've never talked about the period, but to the younger one, yes, I do speak about it from time to time, and to my friends, and certainly to my husband. We talk about the period a lot, and I think that he is following what's going on in this courtroom live. Counsel, today, Mrs. Fines, who is uppermost in your mind?
The President, Madam, please hold on until you see the light on your mic.
Well, in this courtroom, my first thoughts go to my mother. I didn't see her die. I have an image of my mother imprinted into my mind. She was so hungry she had almost withered away. She went to the canteen with her rice bowl, and she actually staggered and fell on the ground because She was so emaciated, and then there she was crawling, picking up grains of rice. And now, Mother, I'm telling you that I am bringing this case to the court for you, to bring justice for you. Counsel, thank you very much. Madam, I know you had 2 questions to put to the accused. These have been circulated in the court, and I'm not quite sure how we do this, Mr. President, but should Mrs. Vignes formulate the questions and ask you to put them, or should Mrs. Vignes ask the questions directly herself? There are 2 of them, Mr. President. Yes, I'd like to ask Mr. Kyusampon 2 questions. Why did the Khmer Rouge focus on the 17th of April people, since they had the same status as them? And the second question is, what is the purpose of the self-criticism sessions? I'd like to know the answers to those things.
The President, thank you, and I will refer this question to Mr. Kyusampon so that he can respond to the 2 questions. Mr. Kyusampon, you may proceed. Mr. Kyusampon. Thank you, Mr. President. My respect to members of the bench and everyone in the courtroom, and my respect to national compatriots. Madam Civil Party, first and foremost, I would like to inform you that despite the fact that I did not know the suffering you endured at that time, and by listening to your statement this morning, I myself felt a lot of sorrow. I do understand your great suffering, separating from your family members, and you had lost your loved ones. Nevertheless, the 2 questions you have posed to me are interrelated. The first question was, of course, related to the second one. It relates to the ideology. It was called the class struggle ideology. I am an intellectual. I was not an idealist of the Communist Party of Cambodia. And I would also like to inform you that the leaders, some leaders of the Democratic Cambodia government, including some members of the Democratic Cambodia government, consider me as highly educated intellectual. They considered my feet not attached to the ground, and I was considered useless I want to make this point precisely clear for you. Nevertheless, I forced myself to flee Phnom Penh. I took refuge in order to have the protection from the Communist Party of Cambodia. I stayed with them for 1 year, and for 2 years I had no choice but to join the Communist Party of Cambodia. And subsequently, I gained some knowledge of their ideology gradually. For these facts, I can only share with you what I had known. According to the theory of the ideological principle of the Communist Party of Cambodia, revolution had to go through 2 stages. The first one being the national revolution, national democratic revolution. This was the stage when we had to struggle against the colonialism, the French colonialism and American imperialism.
And that was the period that national forces had to be reunited to reconcile into a resistance force. Whether those people were former capitalists, they were still gathered for the reconciliation for the purpose of resisting and getting rid of the capitalism, which were considered the oppressed class or the peasants class. For that reason, a lot of Phnom Penh residents at the time joined in the resistance movement. And they joined the movement in various forms, including the process of demonstration and some other activities opposing the Lon regime. And sometimes they collected the money together to buy the medicine for malaria treatments to those who stayed in the jungle. At that time, sympathizers to the resistance forces existed almost everywhere throughout Phnom Penh, and the majority of the sympathizers resided in Phnom Penh. Although they might not assisted in material support, they assisted in their sympathy, in their emotional support to the resistance movement. That was the first phase. As for the second phase, it was the socialist revolution phase and the construction of communism. From my recollection, in April or in May, at the Silver Pagoda, that was the first time that a meeting was held by the Central Committee. Pol Pot, in his representative of the Communist Party of Cambodia, made an announcement that the victory of the 17th April 1975 was indeed the end of the popular democratic revolutionary movement, it indicated that it's the conclusion of the United Front and of the GRUNC. And that indicated the phase into the socialist revolution and the socialist reconstruction and the protection of the country. The idea behind Pol Pot thinking was that the situation at the time was in need of an urgent attention. Vietnam, after they reconciled their countries, they were in no need of Cambodia, and for that they would turn to attack us. So Cambodia had to urgently rebuild our country, and not to let the Vietnam catch up and swallow us. So the democratic, the socialist revolution and construction was of the general concept that all the land was no longer of the members of the cooperative belonging or possession. All the land became the property of the cooperatives, that is, the property of the people. Therefore, we built dams and canals in a speedier process so that it doesn't have to have any conflict with any individual pieces of land here or there, because the land was for common use, and that would speed up the process of the construction of dams and canals. And I myself witnessed that in 1976, when I had the opportunity to leave Phnom Penh. I saw canals and dams, including Tropang Thmo Dam and the one to the west of Battambang, whose name I cannot recall. It was of huge size. As for the Tropang Thmo Dam, it looked like a sea in the middle of the field of the used to be dry land. And as a result, those dry land transformed into checkered rice fields to the horizon. And that excited me. And of course, the saying goes, whenever there is rice, there is everything. And the people would be fed sufficiently, and the excess would be exported overseas, in particular to our friendly countries, including China, Korea, Yugoslavia, etc. And that in return, we will be able to purchase the agricultural products, including hoes, knives, axes, etc. And we could even gradually build our factories with the imported iron in order to build water gates for the irrigational purposes for the rice field. And I indeed saw the purchase of those large-scale machineries. That is to assist the people. But unluckily, those machineries had not yet been distributed to the people due to the entering into our territory by the Vietnamese forces. And let me repeat again, I was excited when I saw those large-scale dams. But during the course of the proceedings before this chamber, when I have heard the testimonies of the witnesses, I was so shocked, as I was not aware that the dams, the canals were constructed in exchange of such a great loss. I did not know that. And I was also extremely shocked whenever I heard the testimony of any witness or civil party. And this is my words to you. Now let me return to another issue. And it is because of that understanding they try to focus on all the forces of the country for the building of the dams and the canals. And indeed, everyone who came here talked about building dams and canals. And the purpose at the time was not to split the forces inside the country, inside our nation. As for the regime of criticism and self-criticism meetings, it was within the framework of the ideological principles of social classes and class struggle, in particular for the party's members. During the popular revolutionary movement, the People's Party had to sacrifice the most in order to be an example to the entire nation, to the entire people, so that those people would join in the resistance movement. And in order to form and achieve their view, criticism and self-criticism meetings had to form. And everybody acknowledged that the Democratic of Cambodia forces were of the high merit. They were contradictory to the forces of the Khmer Saray, who only robbed the people of their property. As for me personally, I also had to participate in the criticism and self-criticism meetings in order to build myself into a proletariat class. That is during the phase of the socialist construction. But I myself could not get rid of my former class because my mentality was still that of the capitalism and the semi-capitalism, as I still had funds for my relatives and family members. Of course, I tried to encourage myself to only focus on the only benefit for the nation, and that I should sacrifice everything and concentrate my entire endeavor based on the view of the proletarian class, of the poor peasant class, and the poor middle peasant class. But personally, I could not achieve that. Despite some of the leaders who were intellectuals or lower intellectuals, and who also went through the class struggles and criticism and self-criticism meetings, they could successfully build themselves That is, they get rid of their proletarian or their capitalist class and only focus everything on their resistance movement for every breath they took. But personally, I could not do that. And these are some of the points that I'd like to convey to you, Madam Civil Party. This is my conclusion, Mr. President. And allow me to apologize if I could not respond to your questions, as I am not the ideologist of the Communist Party of Cambodia. President, thank you. Council for Civil Party, you may proceed.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. I believe that Ms. Phineas would like to make a very short statement. This will be the last one, only 1 or 2 sentences. And I'd like to know if you will give me the permission to allow her to make this very short statement.
President, please wait. I notice the Council for Nuji is on his feet. You may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, Your Honours. I'm mindful of the time, but my client has instructed me that he would also like to answer the questions posed by the civil party. I don't know if there is time for that, but if there is, he would like to answer the questions as well.
President, yes, he may do so. Mr. Noon Chie, could you please respond to the questions put to you by the civil party? That is, why the Khmer Rouge focus only on the new people, why they were of a different class compared to the rest of other people, as they should be in the same class as the rest of the people and the leaders of Democratic Cambodia. And for the second question is, what is the purpose of criticism and self-criticism? You may respond to these 2 questions now. Noon Chie. Good morning, Mr. President. Good morning, Your Honours. Good morning, all national compatriots inside and outside the country. I would like to respond to the questions. Although my health is not in a better status, and my response will be that of the benefit to the nation. To start with, allow me to express my respect to all the souls of the Cambodian people and to all the survivors who lost their relatives under the Democratic Cambodia regime. Although during that regime things were complicated, there were partisans within the country, and although they boasted themselves as Democratic Cambodia, but I myself, as one of the leaders, I acknowledge the lack in this area. And once again, allow me to express my regret that the leadership was not of the perfect nature. That is the first instance. And for my second instance, allow me to respond to the questions. Regarding the categorization of the best people and the 17 April people, it is my understanding that the purpose of the Communist Party of Cambodia was that there should be no distinction between the Bach people and the 17th April people, as we had to reconcile our country, to reunite our country for the purpose of solidarity and to defend our country from the invasion, from the aggression and the expansions of the neighboring countries, as we are all aware of that. And there is no need for me to explain whose countries they are. Our neighboring countries who have the ambition to invade our country, and that is the biggest risk to our country. In addition to that, I also had the intention to join with the nation and with the compatriots to defend the nation and the people. And I did not have any request to make any distinction between the old people and the new people. And now on the point of criticism and self-criticism, allow me to clarify it. The purpose of criticism and self-criticism was to eradicate, allow me to say, eradicate the bad elements, the non-compatriot element within ourselves. It is not to get rid of any individuals, but to get rid of the elements, the bad elements within us. So we should not get confused between these two points. Even I myself, early, I also was confused. And that for the purpose of socialist construction and for the purpose of the solidarity for the means of the agricultural production. So I think there have been a lot of confusions in regard to this principle. We gather all the educational or the agricultural tools and means, including the land, so that we could build dams, canals, etc. And that is the purpose of that criticism meeting. President, thank you, Noon Chia. Next, the Chamber would like to give the floor to the Civil Party to make a brief statement as requested by the Council. You may proceed. Noon Chi, allow me to continue a little bit further. My family also suffered, and Sun Kaset was my blood nephew. He died. I was not aware of that. And Pu Jing, the teacher, and Siu Hein, they were all of my relatives. And why should I kill my own people or my relatives or my nation? I myself could not even defend or protect my family members because after the liberation I met my mother. She wept and she said she was pushed to the ground during the evacuation. And she said that I was in my native village. Why should I be forced to evacuate from my native village? So allow me to say that under the Democratic Cambodia regime, there were those bad people as well. President, thank you, Mr. Noon Chia. I think your response to the two questions is now sufficient, as we are running out of the time. So the floor is now given to the Civil Party to make a brief last statement as requested by her Council. Madam Tuj Panaraj, you may proceed.
Yes, I would simply like to ask Mr. Kyu Sompong, who is a Buddhist and an intellectual like myself, just to pray for the souls of the people who died, as well as for those who survived, so that way these people might have a bit of peace. Pray in the Buddhist way. That's all, if you wish to do so.
Kill Sampon. I was not aware that your relatives and family members made such a misery and suffering, and a lot of Cambodian people made such fate, including some of those who were the best people. They made the misery and the suffering, and I was shocked by that fact. At the same time, I cannot forget the souls of the people and the male and female combatants who crawl under the bombardment of the B-52 in order to liberate the Phnom Penh. Those who died would left at where they were, and the one who survived would crawl further to be near the line of the Lunar soldiers in order to avoid the bombardment from the B-52s. They joined the attack, and several of them lost their lives. And I raised my hands to pray and to express my respect with my humbleness to all those brave male and female combatants, as well as the souls of all Cambodian people who died in the circumstances made by the nation. That is, after the end of the American war, it led to the Vietnamese War, and we never had any break of peaceful period during the time. And once again, I pray to the souls of all the people. President, thank you, Khieu Sampon. The floor is now given to the prosecution to put questions to the civil party. You have 10 minutes.
Mr. President, thank you. Good morning to you, Mr. President, to the judges of the tribunal, to my fellow counsel, and in particular to you, Madame Touch Pandarasa. I'd like to cover, if I may please, two parts of your evidence. The first relates to a person you've spoken about in your evidence, General Touch Sari. Can you please first of all describe what relation to you was General Touch Sari?
General Taisari was my cousin by marriage. He married my cousin Ned Naren, so he is my cousin.
What happened to him?
On the day when the Khmer Rouge entered the city, my cousin had left the house, and as I heard from another cousin who met us later, he was called up over the radio to go and present himself at the Ministry of Information, and that's where he went. And then the same cousin told me that she actually witnessed my cousin's execution. She told me that.
Madam, I've done a search of the case papers in our case, and I'd like to check the spelling of this general's name. I'm referring to document number E3/276. I only have the extract in English because it was from the United States Department Archives. The English ERN is 00168021. And in this document there is a heading talking about the French press agency listing generals reportedly executed. It was a broadcast through Hong Kong in English on the 21st of May 1976, and the text reads as follows, and I quote: Bangkok, 21st of May. The Khmer Rouge captured 54 Cambodian generals when they seized Phnom Penh in April 1975 and reportedly executed them, often with their families. The Cambodian resistance movement claimed here today. There is then a list of the 54 generals, and I'd like to check, please, so that we're sure. The spelling on this is as follows for general: Touch, T-H-A-C-H, Sari, S-A-R-Y. Is that the proper spelling of your cousin, General Touch Sari's name?
Yes, it is right. T-H-A-C-H-S-A-R-Y. He was in charge of General Nol's security detail.
When the person informed you that your cousin General Touch Sari had been executed, did that person mention any other people being executed on that day who were connected with the Lon Nol regime?
I don't know any further details. She told me those facts. We held a brief ceremony, we prayed, and that's all I can tell you. I really can't tell you any more than that.
I'd like to move on to a separate topic now, which is the time when you mentioned that you were on trucks going through Kampong Chhnang to Persat, and you described them as cattle trains. Madame, we know that the evacuation of Phnom Penh was on the 17th of April 1975. Can you help me, please, with how many months later or what time of the year it was when you were on a cattle train going through Persat?
Well, I must say the whole thing seemed like an eternity. I can't tell you how long it lasted, 3 months, 25 days, I'm not sure. It was the train they used to deport us. We reached Kampong Chang, then Pursat, and then they took us towards Phnom Ting. Those were the different phases. As for the duration, time barely existed at the time. 20 days seemed like 2 months, 35 days could have been a year. A certain amount of time went by, but that's all I can say.
Did you have any choice whether to be on that cattle train or not?
I had no choice whatsoever. We were constantly pushed by the soldiers to get onto the train. The train was jam-packed with people.
You described the period after you arrived as the time when the true famine began. Can you help me, if you're able to, on how long after you arrived in the forest or the jungle people first started dying?
When I was in Phnom Ting, there were already a good deal of health problems. We had nothing to eat. Some people tried to gather wild vegetables. I myself had a thorn in my thumb, and luckily my husband was able to operate on me because the whole thing swelled up, and I would have lost it if it had not been to him. I had a high temperature, and I wouldn't be here today if he hadn't solved that problem. And hunger had already become widespread by that stage. They didn't give us anything to eat.
This is my final question. You've arrived in the jungle. My question is, did people start dying within hours, within days, within weeks, or within months of that arrival in the jungle? I saw people who had eaten too many wild plants who got diarrhea and began to die. But it was in 1976 that people started to expire in large numbers. Thank you. I have no further questions.
The President, thank you. Now I hand over to the defense team for Mr. Nguyen Chie to put the question to the civil party. You may proceed. Counsel Sonarun. Good morning, Mr. President. Good morning, Your Honors, and good morning to everyone. And good morning, civil party. I have only 2 questions, and my international colleagues would have another 2 questions. My first question to you, you told the court that in 1972, Viet Cong shell on my house, not on the Khmer Rouge house. So my question to you is, why did you come to know that the rocket shell was launched by Viet Cong?
Well, I know this because an original document typewritten in French belonging to my father actually mentioned on the 6th of May that his house was shelled by Viet Cong shells. My father was working under the orders of General Tak Sari. He was, prior to that, financial director of the water administration, and that's the document that I'm basing this statement on. And I still have it in Paris, by the way, and I have given a copy of it to my lawyer.
Thank you. This is part of the history. It's very important. I would like to follow up to my first question. So is it fair to say that back in 1972, Viet Cong troops were fighting in Cambodia? There was an existence of Viet Cong in Khmer. Was that correct? Because at that time we were fighting, the Khmer Rouge were fighting with Lon Nol, and of all a sudden, Viet Cong shell hit your house. So is it fair to say that at that time Viet Cong was actually interring and fighting in Cambodia?
I refuse to answer that question. I am a civilian. I'm not involved in politics. I leave politics to politicians. I do not know. I base myself on my father's document. That's all.
Thank you. With Mr. President leave, I would like to request the letter from your father so that it can be kept as part of the historical record. With Mr. President leave, I would like to submit this request. The President. Thank you. On this request, the Chamber wishes to clarify on 2 points. Civil parties, if you can forward a copy of the document as per the request by the defense team for Mr. Nguyen Chia to the Chamber first, is good. That is the first point. And the second point concerning the documents as well as question concerning the documents are not relevant to the temporal jurisdiction of the proceedings before us, because the temporal jurisdiction of the Khmer Rouge Tribunal is from the 17th of April 1975 to the 6th of January 1979. Council Sonoran, I have one last question for you. Following your statement to the court this morning, You told the court that on the 17th of April 1975, back then, the Khmer Rouge evacuated you and your family members from your home, and you were being evacuated by groups of soldiers in different uniforms. They forced you to leave your homes. And then you said that later on, there was a different group of soldiers in different kind of uniform told you that you had to leave your house, and they were very aggressive, and they told you that you would leave your house for only a few days. I don't know if I summarized your statement correctly. I stand to be corrected.
No, Counsel, you got this wrong. What I said was that there were groups of Khmer Rouge soldiers. They weren't different types of soldiers. They were all Khmer Rouge soldiers. And I recognized them by the fact that they were wearing black uniforms and carrying guns. There were no other groups. They were just the Khmer Rouge soldiers.
Thank you. So I have got only 2 questions. I think that probably I got it wrong from your statement. Now I do not have any further question. I cede the floor to my international colleague. Thank you, Mr. President. The President. Thank you. Counsel, you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. I only have a few brief questions to the civil party. Madam Civil Party, you mentioned earlier your cousin, from whom you had heard the story that General Taksari had been executed. What's the name of your cousin? Who told you this?
It was a woman cousin. She was in the military. She was working in her particular section, and she passed away 2 years ago. She came to France as well, and she passed away in France 2 years ago.
What was her name?
Elle s'appelle Yuan. Y-O-U-R-N, Yuan.
Do you remember when exactly she told you this story?
Yes, when we were already in Phnom Penh, in the jungle.
Would you be able to say when exactly?
It was when we were together, when the 6 families were together in Phnom Penh.
And would you be able to tell which month of which year that was?
I seem to remember that it was August because it was the rainy season. My children suffered a great deal from the rain. It was the start of August.
Thank you.
President, thank you. Next, I hand over the floor to the defense team for Mr. Kyew Sampon to put the question to the civil party. You may proceed. Council Kungsamon. Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning to member of the bench. And I have a few questions, and I and my international colleagues do not have any question for this civil party. Thank you, Mr. President. The President. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Panara. The Chamber has already heard your statement of your suffering you endured during the Khmer Rouge period. Your testimony before the Chamber has now come to an end, and the Chamber wishes to record this statement, and I believe that your statement will contribute to ascertaining the truth in this chamber. I wish you all the best, and court officer is now instructed to coordinate with the WESU in order to arrange the transport of the civil party back home. Next, the Chamber will hear the testimony and the statement of suffering of TCCP 7. However, the time is now appropriate for a break. The Chamber will adjourn for 15 minutes, and we will resume at 11:05. The court is now adjourned.
Some change, Chair.